Hello people of the internet, this is KaijuNoir here with a top 5 video to give my final thoughts on the Heisei Godzilla series before moving on to the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy. After reviewing all 7 films, I can clearly see why the Heisei series continues to remain an important part of Godzilla's history. The films were able to achieve something that had never been accomplished before within the franchise, in that it was able to establish a level of consistency across the board, whether it be the narratives, the visual aesthetics, the writing, and the directing. The amount of work put into these films were able to help audiences truly believe that these installments belonged in a specific continuity that had its own look and feel, as well as a sense of identity that separated it from prior Godzilla films. It also helped that Toho had roughly the same crew for the duration of this era. Now, it was through this level of consistency that I was able to pick up on numerous elements that were carried over from film to film. Some good, others not so much. And I'm here to point them out and see just what exactly were the biggest strengths and weaknesses of the series, with the top 5 best and worst aspects of Heisei Godzilla.
Is this Godzilla?
Number 5. Best. Related monsters. A key part of the Heisei series was the impact that Godzilla would leave on the world around him, which led to the creation of several monsters as a result of his existence. Some were made to destroy him, while others were accidents that sprung forth from his own genetic material. This element of the Heisei series brought to mind the Cold War, where the threat of nuclear Armageddon rose as more and more weapons were being developed. What I loved about Godzilla's foes was that despite each of them having some sort of relationship with Godzilla, no two origins were alike. This wasn't like the Amazing Spider-Man series where all the villains came directly from Oscorp. Rather than simply making all of the monsters clones of Godzilla, you've got kaiju origins involving space, time travel, biological warfare, prehistoric life forms, and atomic mutations. Even then, not all of them came about because of Godzilla, as both Mothra and Batra were around long before his existence. Overall, the Rogues Gallery of the Heisei series packed quite a lot of variety, while also complementing both Godzilla and his world. Number 5. Worst. Foreign actors. One element that continued to rear its head time and time again were the non-Japanese actors. Now, I know that the concept of bad foreign actors is certainly nothing new for the franchise, but you'd think Toho would have learned from their mistakes and actually attempted to get some halfway decent talent. I mean, for crying out loud, they were able to get Nick Adams and Cesar Romero for their films back in the 60s. If they were trying to go for an international appeal, then they pretty much failed in that department, since any English-speaking audience participant would immediately notice their atrocious performances. I understand the need for foreign actors since the Heisei series tried to treat Godzilla as an international threat. It would make sense for non-Japanese characters to get involved in either G-force affairs or political disputes. I just wish I wasn't taken out of the film every time I hear a white guy say Godzilla. Number 4. Best. Suits and models. Over the course of this retrospective, I mentioned how amazing the special effects have looked. The designs for these creatures have always been vibrant and vicious. They also have that timeless quality where they don't feel like they came specifically from the 90s. Even the King of the Monsters himself had been given what is perhaps his best looking design since 1964. As for the models themselves, they are a marvel to behold, especially when many of them tower over the kaijus, even after Godzilla's scale was bumped up to 100 meters. Koichi Kawakida's team succeeded in creating some of the most memorable kaiju and setting designs in this series, so much so that to this day Toho is still capitalizing on these specific monsters and sets in comics, video games, and figures. They know that people still care very deeply for these films and their interpretations of those classic beasts. Number 4. Worst. Film references. Now, bad actors I can tolerate to an extent, since they at least serve a purpose in the story. What bothered me even more so are the odd film references scattered throughout the Heisei series. We've got visual callbacks to 80s action films in Biollante, the Terminator showed up in King Ghidorah, Indiana Jones was raiding temples in Mothra, and the Xenomorphs faced off against the JSDF in Destroya. Luckily, these are at least visual cues, and not straight up rehashed plots, which was the case in Gunhead. However, for a film enthusiast such as myself, It's hard to take a movie seriously when I see something that's blatantly trying to take advantage of what was currently popular at the time. Perhaps this wasn't the intention for the writer. From what I've learned, the writer for the majority of these films wasn't so familiar with the kaiju genre, and specialized in more down-to-earth dramas. So he may have tried copying other films that he liked as a way of making his human action scenes more interesting. In some cases they do offer variety, as well as memorable scenes of hilarity, but overall it's an annoyance that I wish wasn't as prevalent as it was. Number 3 Best. Continuity. One of the best aspects of the Heisei series was definitely the fact that it had an ongoing story arc, where the consequences of one film carried over into the next. Perhaps the best examples of this were Biollante and Mechagodzilla 2, where new means of fighting Godzilla were developed after the humans obtained new data from previous films, be it the G-cells from Godzilla's first rampage, or the salvaged future technology from Mecha King Ghidorah. These continuity nods help give this universe a larger sense of scale and make Godzilla's ripple effect on the world more prominent. We also see Godzilla Jr. grow over the course of the series, from an innocent baby to the next king of the monsters. Most important of all is that the continuity of these films don't get in the way of the individual plots themselves. Virtually every Godzilla film has featured a standalone narrative, and while that element is still present, the continuity is able to work as a backdrop to help set up the premise of each movie. The use of continuity in the Heisei series gave each installment more depth and a larger understanding of the setting that surrounds Godzilla and his human and monster co-stars. Finally, it serves as a reminder as to how much the accessibility of films has changed since the Showa era, as audiences are able to view these movies on a more regular basis, and therefore would be able to appreciate Godzilla's overarching journey. Number 3 Worst. Immobile suits. While many of these creature designs looked absolutely dazzling, a lot of them had the same issue of having aesthetics prioritized over functionality. Mecha King Ghidorah was perhaps the first and most extreme example of this, as the suit was so massive and heavy, the filmmakers didn't even bother placing a suit actor inside it. Afterwards, many of the later suits were so elaborate and bulky that the fight choreography ended up suffering. Biollante and King Ghidorah were able to perform exciting tooth and claw battles, but after 1991, that style of fighting almost disappeared in favor of awkward hugging and excessive use of beam spamming. The monsters that really got the short end of the stick were the ones of the flying variety. The puppets used to portray them were perhaps Koichi Kawakida's biggest weakness when it came to his team's special effects work. None of them would flap their wings in a believable manner, and the neck movements were incredibly stiff and lacked any expression. Mothra and Batra were probably the best flying puppets out of the bunch, and even still, they had their own share of problems. Even though this emphasis on the designs of the monsters would continue to play a part in later Godzilla films, we are fortunate enough to have a whole new generation of special effects artists that have learned from the past and have made an effort in making monsters that are capable of giving great performances while also looking as fantastic as ever. Number 2 Best. Human characters. A common criticism that I hate when it comes to the public's perception of Godzilla films is that the human characters are boring and not worth your attention. Even a good portion of Godzilla fans never bother to bring up the human characters and their stories when discussing these films with one another. This led to my focus on the human side of kaiju films back when I started this channel. To this day, that emphasis on the human drama has become a vital part of my reviews. From the get-go, I wanted to show my audiences that this subgenre of science fiction is capable of producing great human stories that are able to provide the backbone for these plots. And that's no more relevant than with the Heisei Godzilla films. Thanks to the enhanced quality of the writing, the series was able to provide us with more three-dimensional characters, each relatable enough for audiences to identify with, and were capable of completing their own character arcs over the course of their individual journeys. We also had a reoccurring character in the form of Miki Sagusa, who went from being a glorified plot device in the first half of the Heisei era to a fully fledged and proactive individual who ran her own section of G-Force. Alongside Miki, we had badasses like Lieutenant Gondo and Emi Kano getting into the middle of the action, tragic figures like Shindo and Dr. Shiragami, who ended up causing more harm than good through their actions, and everyday individuals like Kenichi and Goro, whose lives were changed after they willingly got involved in the kaiju chaos. While the giant monsters are certainly the main appeal of these movies, and are the reason why we watch them in the first place, It's characters like these that make these movies, well, actual movies, and not just glorified special effects demos. They give us a reason to give a damn when a monster is wreaking havoc, and make us feel all the more satisfied when humanity manages to triumph and lament the events of these films. Number 2 Worst. Beam spamming. Now, having bulky suits awkwardly lumber about is one thing, but constantly relying on animated lasers to do all the work is just sheer laziness. The reason why I'm counting beam spamming as its own category here is that while the stiff puppets and suits couldn't achieve much in terms of fighting, films like King Ghidorah and Destroya clearly showed how you can work around these obstacles. Once the Heisei series entered the Beam Wars trilogy, the majority of the choreography was filled to the brim with animated lasers. Now, that's not to say that animated lasers are bad in general. I enjoy a good old-fashioned projectile attack as much as the next guy, but you gotta have variety in your kaiju battles because otherwise those lasers will only take you so far. Take for instance the Dragon Ball franchise. Do you think the fans of the franchise would have enjoyed Dragon Ball if it was nothing but dudes throwing energy blasts at each other without any form of martial arts? Hell no! That's why the Plan to Eradicate the Super Saiyans OVA is hated upon. Now, if you like having an abundance of projectile attacks, that's fine. I know there are fans out there. It's a big reason why people still enjoy a film like Space Godzilla, at least on a visual level. But for me, personally, I find them to be a cheap way of working around the suits, and made the fights extremely repetitive and boring. Well, at least they were able to fix this problem before it was too late. Number 1 Best. Godzilla himself. As I previously mentioned, the monsters are supposed to be the key elements in these films, the part that everyone will be talking about. So to have your main kaiju be able to outshine every new monster you come up with over the course of 60 years is a remarkable achievement. For this era of the franchise, the special effects artists, actors, and writers succeeded in making what I consider to be the most fleshed out incarnation of Godzilla we've ever had. The first film introduced us to a lumbering titan that was in search of nutrition. As the series progressed, we saw more of the tragic side of Godzilla, as we finally witnessed his origins. We also saw him from a sympathetic angle, as we continually saw him reach out to other life forms until he finally found comfort when he encountered his adopted son. Most importantly of all, we saw him as a beast filled with anger, and it's that burning hatred that kept him going, whether it's against the technological advances of G-Force or the abominations spawned from his own genes. This was a Godzilla that was willing to fight to the bitter end, no matter what the cost. On top of that, we also got one of the most iconic and most consistent designs for the King of the Monsters. It's a look that emphasizes the best qualities of Godzilla's personality, and best suits the Heisei era's tone. It's also a design that Toho proudly displays to this very day. While the Heisei era had its issues, you cannot deny that it at least got Godzilla and his entire persona down to a capital T. Now, I would have ended things here, but this is the internet, a place that thrives on negativity. So on with the number 1 worst aspect of the Heisei series. Number 1 Worst. Continuity. As much as I praise the use of continuity on this list, it has proven to be one of the biggest double-edged swords I've ever seen in a franchise. Now, it's possible that because this was the first time we've had a greater emphasis on continuity, this could mean that the writers had little experience with the concept of an ongoing narrative. Even still, there are many points in the series where giant plot holes start popping up as a result of poor writing. This problem is even more noticeable when someone like me watched all 7 films consecutively. The first red flag was the characters going back and forth on whether or not Heisei Godzilla was indeed the same creature as 1954 Godzilla. Now, I know some of you are quick to point out that Destroya gave us the definitive answer. However, before that film was made, we got so many conflicting messages. For instance, one of the Futurians, who not only had a time machine along with complete knowledge on Godzilla's history, stated that by wiping out Heisei Godzilla, they were going to erase Godzilla completely from history. This eventually leads to a time travel scheme that completely wrecks all coherency in the Heisei era. For instance, how come people still remember Godzilla when he didn't make his first retconned appearance until after he was hit with a nuclear sub in that film? In Space Godzilla, why are numerous references made to Biollante and Gondo when the retcon Godzilla had been staying underwater since the 70s? In Destroya, why is there a Super X3 when the Super X1 and 2 should have been retconned out of existence? Also, 1954 Godzilla is brought back into continuity, and is now labeled as separate creature from the retconned Heisei Godzilla. Of course, there have been numerous fan theories and explanations as to why any of this is possible, but as hard as they try, it all comes down to one answer: bad writing. The writer of King Ghidorah wasn't even a fan of sci-fi, so of course he wasn't going to pay attention to his time travel logic. Rather, he focused on the human aspect of his plots. Since then, future films tried to salvage whatever they could from that gargantuan mess and rewrote their own continuity as they went along. Perhaps they were lucky that their films weren't as readily available back then as they are now, since audiences at the time probably wouldn't have caught on as quickly as modern-day Godzilla fans have. Maybe this was why Toho decided to abandon the concept of continuity back when they started the Millennium series. Why bother keeping track of continuity when you can make an anthology of films that each did their own thing with Godzilla? Either way, as admirable as it was to have an interconnected series of films, Heisei Godzilla had a lot of room for improvement, and we've since had franchises capable of creating even more complex continuity-driven films. Only time will tell if future Godzilla films can succeed where Heisei Godzilla couldn't. As of the time of this recording, we currently have a new American Godzilla film that's about to receive 2 sequels along with a crossover movie with King Kong, who is also going to star in his own film beforehand. Seems to me that the influence of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has already taken place. And what about Godzilla Resurgence? Is that going to kickstart another series of films? Can either side of the Pacific Ocean produce a better continuity-driven Godzilla series? Well, only time will tell. With that said, thank you for joining me on this trip through the highs and lows of Heisei Godzilla. Until next time everybody, take care, and don't let your timeline get screwed over by time-traveling terrorists. See you next time, guys.